Soon see. You ready?
Okay, yes.
Great. Welcome to another Deviant Minds NFP project. Our latest project is called Out of the Box. Previous projects have been disparate. We've had the Deviant Minds Salon podcast, we've had Chicago Sex Fest 2013, and we had the Let's Talk About Sex series. We're doing something slightly different this time with Out of the Box. I will show you how it connects to our normal work, which is usually something about human sexuality. But it's a really interesting look at how the more spiritual and magical side of the equation actually can be synergic and work in harmony with the more scientific worldwide paradigm. What we're trying to do here is on the chart. Science, spirituality. We feel that human sexuality actually is a very good bridge between these two because it's the one thing that's on both sides of the equation. There's a lot of scientific things that we know, biological, physiological, about human sexuality that's scientific and well understood and agreed upon. And there's a lot of neat things in sexuality that are spiritual, that are energy-based, that are ecstatic, and that are transcendent. And by studying the two of them through the lens of human sexuality, you can kind of see how these things overlap and work. I've always felt personally that magic was just science that has not yet been explained. So anything that we don't know how it works, it's magical, okay? So, 300 years ago, a TV set is going to be magical to the people, but we know how it works, so it's not magical. So it's not a big deal with the science versus magic dichotomy. One of the key things we learned early on is we got our presenters together on a little online email list, is that languaging is really important. I'm not going to do lots of languaging things today. I will give you one definition that I came up with a few days ago because some of our more rational, empirical thinkers were really bothered by the concept of mysticism. What the hell is it? And I don't want any of the things that we're talking about in Out of the Box to be ineffable things that are just beyond words. So I came up with my own definition of mysticism that I'm going to share with everybody. But language will always be important, so we agree on some terms. And I guess my definition of mysticism is next. I didn't write it down, but you can ask me if you want it, and I'll be happy to send it to you. It'll be on the website at some point, too. Let us see. I wrote, the practice of human transformation that involves understanding spiritual experiences in an embodied mental and physical context to reveal existential mystery. That's my idea of mysticism. Amanda had been using one from the OED that I thought was wretched. And there are a lot of different ones from Webster's Dictionary and other things that are mediocre. I kind of looked at extant material from the great thinkers about mysticism, cobbled some of their thoughts together, and came up with that because I'm fairly good with writing.
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, I'll do it slowly.
Well, he's going to write it, and then send it.
It'll be on the website, but I'll repeat it because it's important. Mysticism, the practice of human transformation that involves understanding spiritual experiences in an embodied mental and physical context to reveal existential mystery. And the mystery part of mysticism is real important. The Greek word that it derived from basically meant to conceal. I'm not big, even though I'm standing here in Alchemy Arts, I'm not big on occult. I don't believe in hidden anything. I believe there are things hidden. I believe our job as scientists and regular thinkers is to reveal what these mysteries are. So, I'm not big on hiding things from people. I believe, you disseminate information per your audience and what they can handle, but the occult thing has never really grooved with me very well. So that's our introduction to Out of the Box in our series. My talk today is going to be on Apopophenia, which you will not see on this sheet at all. Before I even talk about what Apopophenia is and means, I want to talk a little bit about related things that we're not going to have time to go into, but any one of the things I'm talking about today would make a great little mini talk all by itself. I'm really big on semiotics, and which basically means finding meaning and significance in symbols and things. It could be language, it could be abstract symbols, whatever. The science of semiotics, I think, plays a big role in magic and science. There's number mysticism, which is a very broad kind of a term, which I would rather bring down to numerology. And I actually have a decent definition of numerology as a working definition for our group here. Numerology, any belief in divine, mystical, or other special relationships between a number and coinciding events, okay? And that will have a lot to do with my talk, that idea of numerology, and it will have a lot to do with the science that you'll be hearing presented here today by our scientists. I'm not going to go into gematria and things, but basically gematria is kind of the superimposition on letters, like Hebrew letters or things, with numerical values. You add them up, and the totals can reveal all sorts of interesting things. One of my favorites, and I'm going to mangle this because I'm not Jewish, but I do drink the little beverage, Chai, or however you say that, C-H-A-I. In Hebrew means alive, okay? So it's a very good word. So for many Jewish people, when you add up the letters of C-H-A-I in Hebrew, it comes to the total of 18. So for Jewish people, often 18 is a lucky number, kind of a mystical number. And so they give gifts in series of 18, or they do things in 18s because it's supposed to bring good luck. Don't know if it does. But we're not going to go much into gematria or the name of God represented by YHVA or all the mystical things around, that kind of stuff. We're going to pretty much stick to numbers today. And it doesn't start with Pythagoras, but I'm going to start with Pythagoras. Talk a little bit about his concept of the tetractys, which I probably mangled again since I'm a reader and haven't heard people pronounce these things correctly. But T-E-T-R-A-K-T-Y-S is the name, and all it is the 1, the 2, and the 3, and the 4, which, you know, many people in this room have been bombarded by Amanda and David about 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s, and it all flows into this, okay? It all stems from this, but we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that at all. And from a Pythagorean viewpoint, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, and the 4 go from monad, dyad, triad, and tetrad into these superimposed concepts of unity, power, harmony, and cosmos. We do different things with the 1, 2, and 3, and 4, but ironically, there is some correlation to how we use these numbers. And the key thing about this is how they add up. When you add them up, they add up to 10. And numerologists take the 0 off the 10 and make it 1. You come back to unity. It's kind of this perfect circle thing. And the Pythagoreans created both a 2-dimensional and a 3-dimensional pyramid out of the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4 with these dots kind of a thing. And you can do it and actually make a tetrahedron that works the same way. And then they had a whole philosophical belief system on what the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, and the 4s mean. And I'm not going to go through all the zillions of correspondences, all usually called magical correspondences, but they're not necessarily magical. But I'm sure everybody in this room can name lots of things that come in 4s, like the seasons. The Greeks believed in 4 elements. All these things had meaning on these numbers within this philosophy. And that's one of the ways that numbers can have meaning. So when we talk about things like Tantra, for example, and it's kind of interesting how the Tantric philosophies have certain numbers that are very predominant. 9 is 1, and it's kind of related to the 9 orifices of the body. And it goes into more modern times with Enneagram type stuff and other things that come in 9s. There's all sorts of numbers that have meaning imparted to them beyond just the simple number. And Pythagoras was real good at doing that kind of stuff. What I want to talk about, because I'm this, I think one of the reasons it's good that I led this off is I'm kind of a meld. I'm not a mystic at all, so I say that to everybody right now. I do consider myself a magician, primarily a sexual magician, but I am very rational scientific. My educational background is chemical engineering. I come from a family of engineers. My dad went to MIT, very empirical, rational, and it took Manna 12 years to even get me to remotely come to grips with tarot or any of the things that's been her life's work. I thought it was all horsehooey and just, you know, garbage. And so I do have a very strong kind of rational viewpoint on how I understand magic and mysticism, and I find it fascinating how it matches up. Science actually has a segment that's very about numerology, kind of like the definition I just read. The difference is, and there's a lot of fighting back and forth on this, the poo-pooed part of science that deals with numbers is about patterns, okay? Many scientists do not, if you're scientific and you're just observing a pattern in something and then imparting meaning on that pattern, which is basically Apopophenia, it's not really scientific to these scientists. Whereas there are other very brilliant scientists who believe that there's more to science than just scientific observations of empirically, just easily understandable things. That there are, in fact, mysteries. And that by looking at these patterns or these things that are coincidences, that we can learn the solutions to some of these mysteries. Some of these scientists are very open-minded. And a few of them that I will name here, among the many, 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 I think that are pertinent. And I'm kind of doing some of this for Marcus, who is not here yet, who is going to go after me.
Right there.
Oh, okay, here he is.
Sorry for it.
Yay, Marcus. I didn't want you to miss this because I was paying homage to you.
Yeah, you're already linking a lot to things I will follow up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And all of our presentations today will, I think, have coincidental interlinkings, huh? You're very synchronistic. I listed Paul Dirac. I listed him because of his ideas about large numbers, which are very numerological. And I wrote a couple formulas here, which Marcus and Josh could explain to all of us. But it's on the board if you want to know about what these things, one is gravity and one is mass, and T is time. And they're very simple formulas, but Paul Dirac really felt there was something major in the way these large numbers operated within the universe. And I think his work was very cool. And it's more numerological than normal science would do. Hermann Weyl was another scientist, or Weyl, is he German?
Hermann Weyl, yeah, it's German.
Okay, there you go. There's the correct enunciation. Was shifted more to the philosophical side. He was a good physicist, but he also really liked philosophical ponderings on physics and nature, and did a lot of work that I think was very important, that would be considered more on the pattern or less scientific side, but I think his work was very important. Ditto Arthur Stanley Eddington. I'm going to talk a little more on Wolfgang Pauli. If you really want to learn a lot more about Pauli, then go to our website. Amanda's going to pass out business cards today, and we have 4 separate videos filmed of our last Alchemy Arts outing of Mr. Marcus over here, talking about physics in really good, non-boring ways, and then me asking him probing questions, and others in the audience asking him probing questions about things. And one of the things I brought up was Wolfgang Pauli because of a book that he shared with me about the cosmic number. And the cosmic number, none of you would have guessed it. It's just not like, we get 7, we get 9, we get 1, 2, 3, and 4, but 137? What does that mean, Well, the book tells you all about 137 and tells you more about, it's the fine structure constant, but what does that really mean? And of course, it's not exactly equal to the ones, scientifically, there's different ways to interpret it and all that kind of stuff, but this is very much an apopophenic number, the way it was presented in Pauli's life. So much so that I'll repeat one story I told last time, is that Pauli was obsessed with the numbers through his life. It really, for many physicists, is the perfect number in various ways, because certain things divide out of it and it's pure. And anyway, there's lots of things about 137 that fascinate physicists. But as Pauli was ill and not feeling well towards the end of his life, he was put in the hospital. And when he found out, he was put in one room, but then moved to another room. And when he was moved to the other room, one of his visitors says, "Did you do this? Did you have yourself moved to this room?" Because he knew of his obsession. It was 137, room 137, just a coincidence. Pauli knew, he felt it meant he was going to die, and he did die in that room. So, just a coincidence, just horse hooey. What is it? I don't know. But definitely a good example of a apopophenic number. And other things in science are very good about this more pattern side, the concept of atomic triads, again, which Marcus and Josh could really go into town and explain to you what that's about. There's a lot of scientific concepts that, for lack of a better word, I would say are kind of mystical. They reveal mysteries about nature and the universe that are not readily explainable by normal things. But someday I believe they will be, and they'll just be like any other physics formula or anything else. They'll be commonly accepted and understood. It just takes time and work. So now we're finally to the point of my talk with all that prelude, which is Apopophenia. I had to list synchronicity first. Carl Jung and actually Wolfgang Pauli both were fascinated with synchronicity and about causality, and are things that happen, are they coincidental, are they random, do they have meaning, what does all that mean? And that moves into the concept of Apopophenia. The guy that coined the word, apparently, I didn't know this when I kind of wrote my little blurb for our group, but I did more research on it, was another German from the same, actually worked at the same university in Germany that Pauli did for a while, Klaus Conrad. So it comes from German words, which are very Latinate, and it is about how these things connect that are apparently random, but it's about associating numbers with the randomness, where we impart meaning on numbers, like 137. Conrad was a neurologist and a psychiatrist, and so a lot of his work with Apopophenia, which I think is very relevant to my presentation, was about schizophrenia. He worked with schizophrenics, he was very good with schizophrenics, and he did a lot of work on delusional thinking and psychosis around that. I have found from my own personal experience, because I am schizophrenic, and there are people in this room that are schizophrenic, that schizophrenia is an interesting way to expand the mind and connect to certain things. And I think his work revealed some very, very important things beyond being delusional or whatever. What is the value or use of some of these associations? Because there is a value in use. And I have down here some movies, pop culture things, because they're easy for folks to digest. If you see the movie A Beautiful Mind, then you will see the value in patterns in schizophrenia and the way the mind works, because there are great scientists who have used this to advance our knowledge about things, and they have the mental ability to see these patterns that other people cannot see. I consider this kind of a thing, I consider shamanism a form of schizophrenia. I believe that people who label themselves as shamanic, whether they're from a more indigenous culture or they're modern shamans in an urban setting, there is a certain kind of schizophrenia going on in their thinking patterns, and it's a brilliant, beautiful thing. It's not a bad, pejorative thing. Speaking of crazy people who are neat, William S. Burroughs is going to start off on our one apopophenic thing that we're going to explore today. We're not going to go into 137 or other numbers. Our number today is, I've got it on the other page here. Well, I shouldn't even lift it. Our number is, I'm going to throw out to the audience, what do Michael Jordan and Dr. Pepper have in common?
23.
Yeah, okay, really easy. Our number that we're going to focus on today is the 23 Enigma. Okay, that's one of my favorite numbers, and we'll talk a little bit about that. William S. Burroughs was probably the one to start that ball rolling. He wrote a short story called 23 Skidoo, which is a 1920s term. It was slang meaning let's get while the getting's good. Get meaning to leave. Okay. And he wrote a short story about that, and that started the ball rolling on people associating stuff with the number 23, and now it's fucking huge. You will see 23 everywhere now that I have mentioned this. When you leave this room, you will be amazed. And it was kind of incredible, because last night I subjected this lovely young lady over here to a movie called Eraserhead, and I was shocked. It was her first viewing of Eraserhead, and I hadn't seen it in many, many years. I was shocked that Henry Spencer, the protagonist of Eraserhead, that the room number on his crappy apartment, what do you think it was?
23.
It was not. It was 26, and it really disappointed me. Blew my whole worldview. I was convinced. And the one across the hall was 27. So, I mean, it's just like, what the hell?
They missed the boat.
Missed the boat. They didn't know about the 20. David Lynch did, of all people, to not know about the 23 Enigma, but I guess he didn't. So, another important person would be William Gibson, father of cyberpunk, important for steampunk, wrote a book which I'm going to mangle, I did write it down, Patterns of Recognition, I think was his book or whatever. Yeah, Pattern Recognition. Yeah, Pattern Recognition. So he did and he wrote a trilogy that deals with this a lot too, that's very cool. So William Gibson is important. And of course there's our buddy Robert Anton Wilson, who co-authored a book on the Illuminati trilogy and did some neat things with the 23 Enigma. All these people are important to what we're talking about. And now that I've boosted up the 23 thing, popped the bubble a little bit with Eraserhead, I'm gonna briefly go through selection bias, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, clustering illusion, slash the hot hand, and talk a little bit about, these are all things that debunk what I'm saying. So as I said, I come from a more scientific point of view. There's lots of ways to explain away 23 and every other psychological phenomenon, including synchronicity, okay? And we're not talking facts here, we're talking about belief systems, really. And so, you know, it's really easy to come behind something because you believe in it, because, you know, I love the hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is basically where you say, I knew it all along. I knew it all along. You know, it's just, there's all these things that happen and you kind of affirm it because it's part of your belief system already. If you think you're going to see the number 23, if you think it's important, well, it's because you think it's important, and that's why you're going to see it more often. And so there's lots of good, rational, scientific ways to explain away everything I'm saying, and the point of my lecture is it doesn't matter. It does not matter. There is still something of value here, and that's what I'm going to do on my last page. Okay, we already did Michael Jordan and Dr. Pepper. The 23 Enigma is related to Discordianism, which I am a big fan of, and many others in this room are. The law of fives, okay? Now here is the easiest understood mathematical formula you're going to see today. Look at this one, 2 plus 3 equals 5. Anybody need an explanation on that one? Obviously 23 is important because 2 plus 3 equals 5, and the law of fives says that fives are in everything. Everything can be broken down to 5, so it must be one of the fundamental laws of the entire universe, right? I don't know, maybe. What this all comes down to in Apopophenia, oh, and I missed a key thing. Key thing. I talk so fast because I do. Pareidolia here, okay, really important. Very similar to Apopophenia. Pareidolia is that ability to recognize patterns in things, not numbers or words per se, but where you, like the man in the moon, you see a face in the moon. If you look, it's about visual kind of pattern recognitions where you see things that are not really there, but they're there. And what does that mean? And it's very similar to Apopophenia. So, identical concept, we're just not talking about it today. What this all boils down to really, I'm not going to circle it, lost my pen, but the mind's power to perceive truth in almost anything. Okay, that's the point. The mind has the power to pursue the truth in almost anything. Somebody with a lot of confidence and a strong will can, through suggestibility and other things, get you to believe all sorts of things. You really need to be autonomous and figure stuff out for yourself, whether it's true or not, or even what is truth. There's a huge amount of power in just simple belief, and I think that's our takeaway here. If you believe something to be true, if you believe that by doing ritual and having an intent and sending your sexual energy up to the cosmos and all these kinds of things, if you believe it will have an effect, it will have an effect. And if you don't believe it, it won't have any effect. And so really a lot of these things are about the power of belief and whatnot. And I think that's our takeaway. There's something going on in all this that is not quite understood. That is magic. That is mystical. And the more we understand these things, the more that we'll get. When I put on my chart there the thing about science is matter or materialistic, and then spirituality is energy, it is my personal belief system that we're all vessels, okay? That we contain this thing called spirit. I don't know if there is reincarnation or anything else, but if there is, this energetic thing that is us goes on between lives, just goes in new vessels. There's all sorts of things that may go on with all this stuff, but there is this interesting thing between matter and energy, and we know E equals mc squared. We have scientific things around this, but we don't really understand how consciousness, human consciousness, impacts on this matter versus energy and spirituality thing. And by understanding human consciousness more, I think we'll have some clues to this stuff. And so there is a way, if there is a group overmind thing, also kind of like the collective unconscious, and there is a way to transmit information via frequencies that's scientifically measurable, there are explanations for why things like tarot cards work, why magical, mystical things actually function, why you get results from these things. But a lot more work has to be done to make these kinds of linking. And so the one thing that I'm not going to go into today, which is really the key to all this, and it's a talk for another day, is what is called superliminal superluminal communication. How does this superluminal communication work? By exploring that, I think we have the key to some of these things about how numbers can be imparted with meaning, how things can be imparted with meaning, how supposedly magical or mystical things work. And anyway, that's my theory, that's my proposition. And I think you'll hear some more on that as we hear other speakers up today. There'll be things that are interconnect into that idea, especially if Amanda talks a little bit about Nikola Tesla, who was one of my all-time favorite people. So anyway, done. Did I make it?
No! Oh, you did that, but...
Burroughs got the ball rolling on 23.
20, his short story 23 Skidoo was one of the earliest references to the 23 Enigma.
But doesn't it go back to the ancient Greeks? Isn't it the sacred number of the goddess Eris of discord? And isn't there a
Well,
whole cult around
there is that whole, I didn't have time to go into that, but I did mention Discordia. I mean, any other things on my chart, and thank God it's, on the little film there, you could do lots of reading. I mean, there's a lot of hot topics here. But yes, you're absolutely correct. What I'm saying is the 23 Enigma did not exist until the 20th century when Burroughs and his little group of friends kind of made it into a thing. And once you make something into a thing, there's power behind it. And I think that's why I'm sitting up here talking about that. And the fact that important people were born on the 23rd of February and all these coincidences. Yeah, that's how the 23 Enigma happened. Any other questions?
A comment. You seem skeptical that science would embrace or does embrace patterns and numbers, and I think that I would disagree strongly with that. I think scientists love patterns and numbers, but I think what scientists don't like is arbitrariness.
Right,
So,
random factor.
well, not so much the random factor, but they have to be real numbers. And by real numbers, I mean things that you can't change from inches. Well, I'm going to stand up because that chair just self-destructed.
Around chairs again.
So
Get a metal one.
yeah, well, so patterns and numbers are great. Arbitrariness is crummy. So if I change my units in my measurement from inches to centimeters, for example, and all of a sudden my beautiful 23 turns into 12 and a half or 15 or something like that, that tells me something, right? It tells me that the numbers themselves that were involved in that relationship don't have any real significance. I've made other choices in the measurement or in the system, and the number itself has some sort of arbitrary value. But I pointed out that scientists really do like relationships in numbers, and the trick is really finding combinations of numbers that don't suffer from this sort of feature of arbitrariness that makes some numbers untrustworthy or just arbitrary, and some actually have real significance. So if you look at...
But there has to be some arbitrariness in any system. You have to agree on axioms in order to construct theorems. So how do you avoid the arbitrariness that you speak of?
Well, when you look at physicists trying to break down nature to some fundamental set of very simple laws, trying to reduce it down to something as simple as possible, I think the overarching desire is to try to remove as many kind of free coincidences from the model as possible.
But it's only a model, and sooner or later you're going to have to get down to an axiom, which has nothing behind it, right?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that some numbers are arbitrary, and some numbers are not arbitrary. So, if you look at, for example, in pure mathematics, you have transcendental numbers like pi and e, right? Mm-hmm. And these things clearly have some fundamental meaning in that they guide, fern leaves and the growth of, snail shells. And we see these, ratios in particular, ratios of two numbers, things where arbitrary factors like your choice of units fall out of the problem, where you have a true relationship between two quantities that you can compare on the same grounds.
Excuse me, but what you're talking about is just a change in measurement, which is definable by a word, okay? But if something repeats continually, regardless if you're measuring it in 12 and 1/2 centimeters or 23, it's still a pattern. it's still a pattern. It's a repeatable pattern, so it can't.
Sure, right. So what I'm interested in is taking the significance out of the 23, and I'm speaking now for what feels scientifically credible. It's not in the 2 and the 3 per se. It's in the fact that here's a thing that's twice as tall as this thing, and this thing is twice as tall as this thing. It doesn't matter what their actual individual heights are, but when I'm going to compare a bunch of things, the pattern is in the relationship between the things and not the particular digits that might represent, right? And there's some very powerful symmetries and structures that sort of are numbers like pi and e in pure mathematics have real significance in that they're dimensionless quantities that seem to guide the way that nature works. They have to do with growth. If you look at particle physics, in the 60s and 70s, it was realized that there are these symmetries in things like the masses and the charges and the angular momenta of particles that people were observing in laboratories. It's not the particular value of the measured quantity. I mean, I can measure that in Tesla or Gauss, or I can take different meters that have different systems of units. It's the fact that these structures you need to talk on numbers in science, because there's really amazing, wonderful, from fractals to crystals to particle physics, there are important patterns in numbers. It's just that some numbers are arbitrary and some reflect real symmetries and relationships.
I'm not so sure any numbers are necessarily arbitrary, but yeah, maybe. I miscommunicated my point, which is why your question probably didn't get it across. I'm saying that there's an area of science where scientists do not think good science is about the patterns as much as the other side, which is more empirical and observational. And there is a whole thing, and I think the Cosmic Number book was very good about representing it, where there are scientists, and it's bad science, where they're getting their belief systems to fit the data. They're manipulating certain things they see because they want there to be and it's not good science and it's not real science, but they're putting their belief system on it, and that also, my premise is the belief system is very important too. I mean, 137 is a dimensionless number. That's why that's so revered. It's dimensionless, and among other reasons. But when you put meaning into one of these numbers like 23, it takes on a special power. That's part of my premise.
Well, I don't disagree with that, and I wasn't so much disagreeing as clarifying.
Okay, I felt maybe I didn't communicate that clearly when I did that.
Okay, guys, we're way over.
Okay. Then done. Thank you very much.
All right. So I'm sorry that it's going to be a little bit of a rougher transition between this sort of harder arithmetical and harder scientific kind of perspective to the quote-unquote softer psycho-spiritual kind of perspective, and even more so in some ways the Jungian and similar kinds of perspectives. So I'll try to do as much bridging where possible. I don't know how good a job I'll do at that per se, but I'd love to begin my little part of this with a quote by one of my favorite ceremonial magicians, Lon Milo Duquette, who says, "Of course it's all in your head. You just don't know how big your head really is." And I think, if anything, that statement really sums up kind of my take on what we might call mysticism or mystical experience, which I see as attainable through altering consciousness, experiencing non-ordinary states of reality, as some might call it, or non-ordinary states of consciousness, as others might call it. I believe that this type of active dreaming, as Jung might call it, the use of active imagination that's attainable through changing consciousness states, is the way to kind of access mystical states. Of course, I'm making it sound a lot more like it's in our control and it's intentional and purposeful, not forgetting that William James, who is one of the founders of psychology as well as pragmatic philosophy, said of mysticism that one of the features is that it's a passive experience. In other words, it happens to us, as opposed to something that's being kind of in our control or something that we intend to kind of make happen. However, in my experience, I think that it really is possible to sort of maximize the probability, if you will, that you can enter into this sort of changed consciousness place where suddenly it becomes possible to imagine your life in a much broader, in some ways, much more useful way. When you are faced with a particular experience of reality, of the world, of your life, that kind of contradicts any sort of continuity with what has gone before in your life. So sometimes this happens accidentally to people. Maybe they're walking in the woods